your work and life are blended. So there isn't really work and life.
Go Hoosiers, and welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast, presented by Hippo Direct. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur or innovator every single Wednesday morning who's unleashing creativity to grow their business. I'm your host, Max Brandstetter, digital marketing dude at Hippo Direct, and you can reach me at max@hippodirect.com if you're struggling with podcasting or digital marketing. This is episode number 38, and today's guest is Stephanie Goldman. She's the founder of the hot new travel app Map2Next, and she happens to be my friend from the same floor freshman year of college at Indiana University. Hear the ups and downs of building an app, how to pivot your career, and even the value of commencement speeches. Find out what's next. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with Stephanie Goldman, the now serial entrepreneur who literally has founded another company in the time between when we were talking about doing this interview to now recording this interview. Stephanie, founder of Map2Next, and now even the loyalty store. How are you doing, Stephanie?
Hey, Max, how's it going? I'm doing well out here in San Francisco. Thanks for the intro.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for waking up bright and early over there. But Stephanie, this is super cool. We were on the same floor freshman year, which is very famous now in the IU lore, called the BGC, the Brian Ground Club. The Brian floor of McNutt dorms over there. And so our bond goes way back, and we were classmates at the Kelly School. So this is really, really cool connecting. And you've been up to quite a bit since college. So
No, same with you, Max. It's
Thank you.
awesome to reconnect at a time like this. And I really, I enjoy listening to like podcasts and also just informative like talks and lectures on startup lives as well as interviews. So I think this is really cool to be a part of.
Yeah, there you go. Right on brand. Yeah. So now going from listening to preaching. But
Exactly.
Stephanie, for anybody that's not familiar with you, and for anybody that wasn't on your floor freshman year, can you give a little bit of background of who you are, sort of where you came from, and how you got to where you are today?
For sure. So I'll try and keep it as concise as possible, obviously.
You could take hours and hours if you want.
There's a lot that goes into it. But so basically I'm from South Florida. I've always had an interest in business. And when I was looking into what school to attend, like IU stood out for kind of two reasons. One is because it was always in like sort of top 5, top 10 lists for best undergraduate business schools. And then also it was, one of the more affordable out-of-state options, and got a scholarship there as well, which really helped move the needle on, me attending. But basically when I did go to IU coming from Florida, I actually hadn't even seen snow at the time. I didn't know anybody there. Exactly. So it was a very, very different decision. When I went back home to Florida and told people I was going to school in Indiana, they'd be like, have fun in Idaho. I mean, Iowa. I mean, where are you again?
All the I states.
Exactly. Like, I think Indiana is more on the map and up and coming these days. But at the time, it wasn't necessarily everybody kind of stayed in state in Florida, said a different way. So, I mean, and then what was super cool and where we met is freshman year was just awesome. Like starting off in a sort of living learning center, but it was the best of both worlds because business people are extremely social in addition to just having like a good academic setup. So it was a really fun freshman year. Some of my best friends are, from that floor. I guess my background to today involves like going to IU for 4 years. During my time there, I became involved with the investment banking workshop, which essentially has like a pretty difficult interview process. And once you get in, it's kind of like a part-time job on top of school, intense on networking, etc. And from that, I got a job at Barclays doing investment banking. Junior year, I did an internship, and then I joined full-time after school.
Huh.
And so I basically, from Indiana, I moved to New York City for 2 years. The investment banking world was it was pretty intense. I definitely enjoyed it and was interested in the work. But like looking back, it was a wild first start out of school in terms of like work-life balance.
A little bit. Have you recovered from the lack of sleep yet?
Yeah, I'm just recovered many years later.
Nice, easy pivot into the startup world.
No, it's changed, I mean, it's different for different reasons. But anyway, so like 2 years in investment banking in New York. I got recruited by a private equity firm out in San Francisco. It was actually, at the time, people go through a series of, it's kind of a structured interview process coming out of investment banking, because a lot of people are trying to hire from that pool. I only interviewed with one firm out in California, and it's the company, that I became really interested in, called GI Partners, out in San Francisco, and got that job. And what was surprising that happened next, and this was like, I hadn't even been to San Francisco. I only came one day for the interview, flew out here for the super day. So what was surprising that happened next, though, is I was like, they usually hire about a year and a half early before you're going to start with them, because like there is some period of time where they hire you, say 6 months into banking, and then you spend more time and leave after your 2 years are up in banking. So anyway, It's just this weird structure. However, when I was coming to work and I told them I could start early, they basically were like, what do you, we haven't really done this before. What do you think about working at a portfolio company on the finance team before joining us in San Francisco? And that portfolio company was in San Diego. And like, same thing happened. I kind of flew out to San Diego for one day, had the interview, and was like, okay, like, I don't see, this could be interesting, because the twist was, you're going to be an investing professional out in San Francisco, but first you can start with us, like, sort of like, on the finance team of a company we'd own, and get that perspective as well.
Right.
So I spent around, about 6 months in San Diego, a year and a half working at GI in San Francisco. And all the while, like, investing has always been really interesting to me, but I especially had more downtime in San Diego because it was more of a like 9 to 5, 6 job. So on the spectrum of things, it was like I had a lot more time to think about what I wanted to do. And in that time, I basically came back to this idea that has interested me, which we could talk about separately, which became Map2Next. But I started playing around with like, how does one shift from like having a finance background and, working in Excel and PowerPoint all day to like more of a technology company, and building something from scratch. And so I started by doing some small test cases, reading a ton of books, working on the weekends, trying to figure out how things could even look, and talking to people, and then sort of made the jump. And now I've been full-time at working on a mobile travel app called Map2Next for a year.
And that's the way the cookie crumbles. Well, shout out Map2Next. It's hot off the press, and I'm glad that we could get you on here pretty soon after it's launched. So it's amazing. We'll get into that a little bit later. Just in your background there, I mean, you've gone to basically every corner of the U.S. in a matter of not too many years through your different experiences there. You went from Florida up to experience the snow in Indiana. You've been on each coast. How do you approach going to a place that you haven't even been to before or aren't familiar with? Because you've done that several times.
Yeah, I mean, I think it totally depends on the person and the situation. And based on moving, I think it really only takes one person, one pretty good friend, to make you comfortable moving to a new place. I would say that Indiana was different. Though I moved and didn't know anybody there, you're joining, it's college, you meet a ton of people right off the bat.
Right. You knew I was going to be on the floor freshman year. You're like, oh, this will be easy.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that was like more straightforward. That kind of at the time felt like the equivalent of going to like a new summer camp. So it wasn't like, it was less like moving and like living in a studio on your own in a new city.
Right.
I did in San Diego. So I think the San Diego move was the most interesting one, because I also lived in a sorority at IU, and then so around a ton of people all the time. And in New York, I lived with 3 guys. And then in San Diego, I moved and I was in a studio. So it was just very different. And I think like there are pros and cons to living in a studio and moving to new cities. And I think that it's good. It just depends on where you are in life and like what the city can bring to you. Like what I thought was interesting is like, though San Diego is absolutely amazing and actually my favorite city in the US, like it just didn't feel like the right timing in my like life to necessarily be there. It felt like a later stage city. So like coming to San Francisco, now that I'm here, I don't see myself moving anytime soon, because there's a ton of opportunity and like there's really strong, obviously, startup scene here.
Wait, is there? I'm not really.
So I think like the city you choose, like it just depends on like what stage you're at in your life as well.
Yeah, it is. And you are Miss Versatile over there. But in terms of IU, both being alums of Kelly there, the fantastic school. And we could just talk for hours and hours about all the accolades there. What about Kelly sparked your interest in eventually going out on your own in terms of entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So I think what stands out about Kelly and just like the business education that we got there was the number of group projects that you have. I mean, if you compare it to just other majors,
Hmm.
at Kelly, there wasn't, I guess I think entrepreneurs are just like, there's something about your personality for the most part that attracts you to it. And like, you can learn obviously about entrepreneurship. And I think learning helps you understand what risk you're exactly taking when you jump into things, which is
Hmm.
obviously super important. So I think that from an educational perspective, it's like understanding the risk reward, right? And like, if you understand that there could be more reward, because at first, like, if you think short term about entrepreneurship, it seems riskier, right? But if you can think
Right.
mid to long term about it, in the sense that you're like building a really valuable like skill set on top of like having a business and like working on something you care about, a problem that you're, very like passionate about, like all of these things, like it basically is about the tip of risk reward. But anyway, I think like from Kelly and IU, it was really a lot of group projects that stand out in terms of that education.
Yeah. Shout out iCore.
Exactly. Yeah. But I mean, I was more in the investment banking scene when I was there. So it was very different. It didn't feel, I don't know, I did maybe know of like one or two people working on maybe starting their own thing. But at the time, we were in college.
This is true.
Yeah. I wasn't like, I don't know. There are obviously people out in Berkeley at Stanford working on startups over here in San Francisco, but at IU, it didn't feel like that was all over the place necessarily.
Yeah, it's different. I mean, I one of my majors was entrepreneurship, and even
Okay.
then, I mean, even then, the vast majority of kids still get full-time jobs out of school, as
Right.
opposed to startups. But I think there's a lot. I think, and Kelly as a whole, there are a lot of people, and we're seeing more and more each year that are starting to go out on their own
Yeah.
or at one time in their life really desire to have that. So it's an interesting thing. It's definitely a small percent that actually starts it right away or starts a business in college, but I think it's
Right.
something that's of great interest to a lot of people.
Yeah, totally. And I remember like in school, I mean, we did like I-Corps, which is the, semester or whatever is year of school. They have you pick a business, like work with a team of 5 people. In that
Mhm.
program, we did create like a sunglass company with interchangeable like sides. And so you could like change
Oh.
what it look like. Yeah. It was an interesting project, but I think the difference is like picking your own problem. Like you can't kind of force someone to pick a problem in a week for the most part. It's like kind of tough. Like the hardest part
Yeah.
of starting something is like understanding the problem some of the
Oh, yeah, it totally is.
time. So create a problem and a solution, like it's just like is time consuming. And I think they can be a little rushed unless you already have something on your mind.
Yeah. So let's get to Map2Next.
Okay.
So this is your baby. I'm sure you describe it, but this is something that you've been working on for over a year now, and it's this amazing travel app that you and your team have created. It's on the App Store. It's what I love about it is it's not your typical travel app. It's there's not just one dimension to it. I think you guys, the way I've described it to my friends and family. So thank you for that giant endorsement, Jack. Is it's almost like you guys have combined some of the inspiration behind Google Maps and Waze and Yelp, as well as all these amazing sites such as Thrillist and BuzzFeed and these lists of places to do. So it's like you have almost your all-in-one travel app that you've created that is super helpful for anyone looking at a new place or even in their own city. And I'm sure that your background as far as moving around city to city has really helped you there. For anybody hasn't tried out the app yet, can you give a little bit of a background of what it is? How would you describe it?
Yeah, for sure. So I always start with the problem that I've been focused on solving, which is this. So at least what got me interested in this route is like when you go to a new city for the first time, people spend an hour or two trying to figure out what to do there.
Yeah.
And it seemed like a huge disconnect to me because there's so much information available, whether that's like
Right.
there's overabundance of information. So you have like all these resources online, you have all these like travel bloggers and content creators, you have friends, you have locals. And yet, you and I we could both go to Santa Barbara for just one weekend, right?
Yeah. I'm in. That sounds great. Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, I went last weekend, which was awesome. But I mean, like, assuming we're both going to write the same place, we're both going to run approximately the same searches on Google. Assume you don't ask friends in this scenario, but and just search online, you're likely going to end up at say 50 to 70% of the same places. And so why are people spending so long trying to figure out what to do? That's always interested me. So Map2Next, as we tried to build it out, it's so named because it's a map-based solution to figure out where to go next. And so one of the pieces that I've always thought was missing was the visualization aspect. So for example, if you read a travel blog, people are spending like 2 to 3 hours writing out, here are my favorite things to do in San Francisco, or like, here are my top 10 favorite rooftop bars. But there's no map. There's no way to like visualize where these places are. And also these websites aren't really accessible on the go as well. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is like the visualization aspect. Like if you gave me these 10 rooftop bars, and I'm interested in all 10, right?
Yeah. Well, who wouldn't be?
Yeah. So like, how do I actually get to all 10, right? What would be easiest is if I had a map of those 10 places, I could see my location at any given point of time where I was interested and just figure out pretty easily which was closest to me. And that's what's missing with these travel blogs and these tools that just give recommendations.
And you've done an amazing job with it. I mean, right when you open the app, you see like it's a fun map to play with and go around, and you have so many different filters or lenses, or I'm not sure what name you use for it, but the different categories of things, right, i.e. rooftop bars that you can visualize.
Yeah. So like basically this version of Map2Next is pretty buttoned up for like a first launch for sure.
and warranted.
Yeah, no, a lot of work has gone into it, but basically like there have been 3 layers in trying to solve this problem. Like how do you make it easier for people to travel to new cities, right? Like first version I do feel is like it's a step in the right direction and it has a lot of the tools to eventually like to get there. And it's interesting and useful right now. But basically like the 3 groups I've always thought of are like content creators, like Thrillist, Eater, Time Out, then like travel bloggers, which there are a ton of, and then friends. And so these are the 3 aspects that I wanted to connect with people able to create their own profiles of like places they like, right? And over time, like I could just see, okay, what's Max like recommend in LA or in Florida, like, wherever you might, like any place that you might know well, right?
Of course.
Right. And so just to get the app loaded with content, we started with some of like trying to distill these like articles for people. But, the feedback we've gotten in the direction we're now shifting towards, so hopefully we can get another iteration out within the next few weeks to a month, but because it's a pretty kind of significant rewire, is like focusing on like peer-to-peer a lot more.
Yeah.
So after launching the app, I spent like 2 weeks in like Dolores Park, which is a park in San Francisco, talking to people most of the day about what they thought about it. People kind of light up at this aspect of like, I want to know what my friends are doing. And usually when they travel, they do ask, a friend and you text them and they like text you back with like a few things to do.
Yeah.
But anyway, long story short, like Map2Next is coming a peer-to-peer like travel discovery app whereby without even asking somebody, you can like people kind of create public, profiles that are like, here are my recommendations. And so without asking somebody or knowing they have a recommendation there, you can very easily see it and connecting all of that to maps. So like the fundamental components are the same, but just a slight shift in like what the target use case is.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense that people want to connect with other people as the world gets more and more connected. Back to the start, can you kind of walk us through at what time point this transition from just an idea in your head to, all right, let's actually make this app. Let's make this a full-time thing.
Yeah. So, it's like you have to really de-risk the leap a little for yourself because for the most part, the expectations have to be that like you're going to try and like things might not work out, right? So with that in mind, how do you de-risk that? So I started by doing a ton of research. Like how do I get as much on paper and do as much of the work I can myself? Because like the primary thing is that I'm a business person at the end of the day. Like I have finance background, but I can't engineers are super expensive, right? So like with any work that's done and also without knowing the complexities of the work, it adds a different layer. So you just have to like get up to speed and do a lot more research before you can put things into action some of the time, which I'd argue has pros and cons. Good because you're more thoughtful. But anyway, I guess I started by trying to ask friends who were building or like in engineering, like what tools I could use to map something out, that weren't just like a pen and paper. that were like, I could actually share them with other people really easily as well if I needed to and like stay organized. Yeah. And that's where I started. And I think like one of my friends recommended some Google platform that was basically like a sketchboard, some Google product that was a sketchboard. And it wasn't great. Like I didn't really like it because I felt like I couldn't like mirror an app well using it. It was too
Yeah.
broad. And so, I mean, there are, right? Like now that I'm in the space and I've dealt with this for a while, like designers here use a platform called Sketch for if you have a Mac, and if you have a PC, you use Figma, it's called. And there are different, like, there's different software you use. But like as a business person, what I ended up doing was using actually PowerPoint.
Yeah. Okay. I know that one. I'm familiar with
Yeah,
that one.
exactly. I mean, it was extremely easy for me to use, right? And like I could just convey
Right.
ideas pretty quickly and change things. And I basically took a PowerPoint frame and just changed it to the size of an iPhone screen, and then found like a website I could get icons from and just messed around with things from there. Tried to read a book about design and figure out how do these things work. I basically started by, I probably spent like 6 to 9 months just reading and trying to get up to speed on like what goes into all this and like how the process works. And like, if you build a company, like who do you actually need to make, like to build things
Yeah.
from a, like, you know, where do you allocate and how do you allocate resources perspective.
Mhm.
But I started by just like working with one college student and seeing if he could even pull in some of the data that we would need to build this app. Right. And then when he kind of proved out that this information actually was available, because I mean, at the time, I didn't really have a sense for how possible or feasible or what the timeline for even building something like this would be.
Yeah. It's a bit of an undertaking.
Right. It's like apps are actually really massive undertakings. Like
Yeah.
I work at a co-working space now and I see people with like apps in their roadmap, like in their future product roadmap. And it's like, is that realistic? Like, do you have a team to work on this? Like, do you know, have you ever worked on one? Like, it's actually a lot more than one would suspect. But anyway, so I started with a college student and just like working on the back end. So like, can you bring in the data that you need to build this app? Basically, we built a version together and I designed it myself. And the design was not, it was like icons I clipped, you know, and it was very, don't get me wrong, I still put a ton of work into it. And we,
Right.
without really showing it to people as well, because it was kind of like a side project, you know?
Right. I'm envisioning like a Picasso painting.
Uh, yeah, it was, yeah. So, but you know, what it did was just working through that with him made me confident enough to know that I could figure it out. You know,
Yeah.
like I knew that first version wasn't going to be the end all be all. And I also knew that it wasn't like, you know, the reactions from the crowd or like from friends weren't like, oh, wow, this is like, you know, 100% on the mark. But at the same time, it was like, oh, wow, I had built something like I know, like I can manage someone, all these new things that I had just never done before.
Wow.
So once I had that confidence that when I did leave my job full time, like, and I told them, hey, I have something that I just am really passionate about and want to work on. Like when I made that move, I had more of a sense that I was capable of doing it and like kept coming back to it. So wanted to, right?
And totally, and well deserved. I mean, I remember. I don't think we were in too many classes together, but I just remember from freshman year how smart you are and how I'm like. It did not surprise me at all that I heard that. Yeah. No. Again, I accept checks later. But it's not surprising at all that you've launched this app and are up to incredible things. What has been the biggest challenge that you faced along the way so far?
I think the biggest challenge actually comes from one of my weaknesses, which I would also say is, I don't know, I would like to hope that at some point it's a strength, but I think one of my biggest weaknesses is asking for help sometimes. Mm-hmm. Because like I love like just doing it all on my own, you know, like doing things on your own to me is like part of the learning process and super fun.
Yeah.
But you put some of the time, I mean, like sometimes like and obviously like with startups, with everything in life, it's way better and easier to have a mentor who's a few years ahead of you, who can walk you through some of these things or ask for help from friends. Like, hey, can you take like 30 minutes, look this over? Like, let me know what you think. So there's a lot of like, you know, with startups, you have to get something in front of people.
Yes, that is important.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's like a level of approaching people in ways that is like not necessarily normal course. Like, so it was just new for me. Like a big challenge was like, you know, doing user testing, like walking up to random people all day at a park, or like reaching out to all your friends and showing them something you built and trying to actually get feedback.
A lot of like, hi, I'm Stephanie. Nice to meet you. Please review my
Yeah.
app. And it like replaces like, how are you? And so
Yeah, no,
I can imagine, I know how tough it can be when you get like a small percent getting back to you, but sometimes, a lot of times it's quality over quantity, I feel.
right. That's fair.
Sometimes where the best nuggets of feedback come from.
Totally.
On the flip side of thing, like when you think about the positives, so what's been the most rewarding part of this journey so far?
I think the most rewarding part is like feeling like I feel my skill set developing.
Yeah.
So like as you mentioned at the beginning, I currently like dabbling a little on this other idea I recently had, which I think could be, which we could talk about as well. But basically like,
Yeah. I was like, whoa, okay.
right. So like with building something, like once you feel like you can do it, like, I've hired many people at this point, managed many people, kind of understand what has to be done and in what order. And like, it's all about prioritization. And I'm not saying I'm there yet by any means, but it's like, you have to work on these things and you have to kind of spin your wheels to get better sometimes. And I feel like I've done a good amount of like going through things at this point to understand like better how to prioritize things and how long things take.
Right.
So anyway, so I think the biggest positive outcome is just like feeling way more confident in things going forward. Like really
Mhm.
seeing like things as everything as a learning experience, I think is most positive.
Yeah, and there's no better learning than throwing yourself into the fire as far as the startup world that you're
Yeah.
in, and especially in the
Yeah.
area that you're in, where it's so uber competitive. Well, no pun intended with Uber, but so super
Yeah.
competitive.
Yeah.
You know,
No, it's an interesting space.
before I am curious about your second baby of an app, your second baby of a startup that you launched. But before we get to that, in terms of the actual app of Map2Next, what's your personal favorite part and use for it?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, my personal favorite is like I want, when people come to SF and say I have like 10, probably 5 to 10 people realistically, you're asking me for things to do.
Mhm.
The ability to like point them to the app and say, here are my things, like all organized for you, and like
Bam.
for them to like quickly get around. I think that's kind of the goal. And over time to like be able to collaborate with people and things like this, but a more personal touch on something you're going to get asked anyway.
Yeah, and what you're in it, and it's like a gift or a present you're giving them because, as you mentioned, there's so much like information overload these days
Yeah.
that there's so many great things that are out there, but it takes so much time to search through everything. And you're basically giving them through this app. You're allowing people to give each other this bundled gift of, hey, here's all my favorite things. Here's what you can do, and to make the most out of this visit. And you don't have to spend any time looking it up. So that's so powerful.
So this is like, I mean, people have tried to like make, I mean, however you want to phrase it, like trip planning, travel discovery more efficient. But
Yeah.
the bump in the road is, and why nobody has necessarily been successful is like there are so many different traveler profiles and personality types to account for that like filtering becomes a huge, huge thing. So
Yeah.
like version one of Map2Next, like even if you give people articles, like people have to filter through these articles, right, to get exactly what they want. And so what we're experimenting with now and the shift more to peer-to-peer is like, is this the elegant solution to filtering and curation? Like, because for example, so if you look at my profile and say, here are Stephanie's Rex, well, you also know me. So you're able to say, okay, and here's like the type of person, and here are the type of, like you kind of have this natural intuition
Yeah.
into what I would recommend, So like you probably have a budget friend versus like a more adventurous friend versus like all these things.
Right. Yeah. You got like the friend that's like skydiving on Monday, and then you have the
Yeah.
the friend who's chilling
Yeah.
at home.
And you're like, I want to have this type of like adventure. Well, let me check out their recommendations.
Yeah, that's tough.
But like executing on that is obviously kind of the stage we're in. And it's just like there are so many different types of people and people are looking for different things.
Totally. And speaking of different things, the loyalty store. Can you enter
Right.
that?
Okay, yeah. So yeah, really quickly on that because it's much newer, but basically,
Yeah, this is super hot off the press.
right, it is. So like with Map2Next, I basically it's a free app, right? And I built it and I'm working on it because I think it's something people really could use and need. But because it's a free app, I spent cycles around monetizing it. And with monetization, there are very obvious paths. And like my thing has always been we're connecting people with places. In and of doing that, there are a lot of different ways you can monetize, right? But you need users to get that going. I mean, the classic ways, easy ways you can sort of monetize it are through affiliate booking. So like, you book, you come to SF, you're in this app, you also book like an event or something. And, Map2Next makes like some percent, like 10%, whatever. And then there's like traditional advertising as you get bigger and all these other small things you can do, right? But it's like, I was thinking about how more direct monetization. So like, instead of getting 10%, how do you get more like 80 to 100%?
Just for an example.
Right. It's because at the end of the day, that's more appealing, like direct monetization. So, and then, I mean, basically just through some conversations I've had trying to create Map2Next with like just different restaurant chefs and like product managers at OpenTable and TripAdvisor and things like this. Anyway, I had this idea about monetization, but then kind of it doesn't make sense really to bundle with Map2Next. It kind of makes sense to start just as a very simple website. And so just called it something completely different, called it the loyalty store. The concept behind it is basically like came to me from like this series of conversations and then also my experience like growing up, which was like, I go to the Cheesecake Factory pretty often and.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, especially in South Florida. And they have like gift card deals that are like buy, two $50 gift cards for $80, right? And like everybody jumps on that. So I was trying to think about how to incorporate like, something that monetizes. And this whole idea about gift cards came to me, which was basically like, what if you help local businesses issue e-gift cards at slight discounts to attract new customers? So you can think about it sort of like Groupon. They have vouchers, but the difference is like gift cards encourage people to return, right? So like vouchers encourage people to like act once. But for businesses, like what's interesting about gift cards is they're actually like work nicely on both sides of the coin. And like users like gifting things and they like discounts and they like gifting things.
Yeah, this is true.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the business side, like businesses are looking for ways to attract new customers. They're spending money on marketing dollars anyway, and they're open to these type of deals. And well, at least that was the thesis behind starting this.
Huh. So what's your vision with this? Is it going to be, is it going to live on the website or is it an app? Like what's this look like?
So I think with this one, it's beginning days for sure, but I've just started by having conversations around it. And I spent a day walking around to local businesses asking if they would be interested in something like this. And like some really interesting points came out of it, which are like, some businesses don't even have gift cards and like would even love just the ability to issue gift cards. So I think that was interesting that like there are all these different POS terminals and like, so anyway, there's a need just in the gift card market generally. But then also, of the say 50 businesses I talked to, 35 to 40 gave me an email to follow up with. So people were interested. And I had nothing, I had nothing at the time, right? Like I'm working on Map2Next daily, but I spent like 5 hours going around like on the 3 streets in my area.
I love it.
Yeah. I didn't even have a name at the time. So I was just trying to evaluate like whether this is an idea, but I think like it would just be a very simple website that sells like e-gift cards at first at discounts. And trying to figure out how the transaction works is the really difficult part, or like is the technical challenge, right? So like not to go into it too deep, but basically like the way like, a customer comes to your website, they buy a gift card, like what happens after that? And like, they're just intricacies to consider. So yeah, that's kind of that. And I think the vision is to just do it as a standalone website. I think it's much kind of lighter touch than Map2Next. Like an app is a lot harder to get up and going.
As you know very well now.
Yeah. But I think like over time, the two do have some nice, like, I would love to be able to sell, like, I don't know, to connect the two.
Yeah. You have to go to the boss, which is pretty easy for you. Can you imagine getting a 100% open rate on your next marketing message? Well, you can with extra large postcards that are impossible to ignore. Hippo Direct can help you find the perfect list of proven direct mail responders. We can even help lay out and design the postcard for you. Check us out at hippodirect.com. Let's get to a segment on inspiration and creativity to see what gets your brain clicking. So Who's been the most influential person to you in the business world?
Sure. So, it's definitely Oprah.
Of course.
I'll laugh right after, but I think it's just obvious at this point. Just kidding.
She's a legend.
Yeah, she's a like absolute icon. Some of the work she's done is just incredible, but she's one of those people that just really speaks to you. The way she thinks as like a businesswoman and like her whole story around like why she does what she does makes her like an entrepreneur. She's just an entrepreneur in so many different things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think like that one is kind of self-explanatory. I think another person who stands out is actually Sarah Blakely.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Spain.
Yeah, and the reason is because when I first heard that Spanx was like $1 billion company or whatever, I was kind of like, what? Like what in the world? Unappreciative, I guess, a little. Like I was like, what, why? But at the same
Uh-huh.
time, I think like knowing how hard things are to start from scratch and to do, and like hearing her story, and reading more about it, I like actually like going through these same challenges. I'm like, oh my God, this is insane that she took this product and got it this far. So I have a lot of respect on that. Like it takes a lot of grit because you can only imagine like trying to sell the product that she's selling, like something that like helps, however she wants to phrase it, like women like suck in their stomach or like not have lining when they wear a
I think
dress.
that's exactly how she phrases it.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean that's like a hard sell. Like imagine like talking to older investors about this type of product.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are two amazing examples. So I see how they've inspired you. How about hobbies? What do you like to do outside of work to keep your mind fresh?
Yeah, so I mean, in California, there are just a lot of road trip options. So I
Uh-huh.
really like trying to road trip when I can on the weekends. Just, even going like an hour and a half. So there's obviously like Napa and Sonoma nearby, but then there's Santa Cruz, Monterey, Carmel, Silicon Valley area, Berkeley. So anyway, I think road trips are a big thing, and then play basketball a lot.
Yeah, Hoop Dreams. Shout out freshman year.
Yeah, yeah. I remember we played a few times as a floor.
Yeah, the SRSC and the
Yeah.
courts across from McNutt. Those good times. You have the J.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like fun. It's nice to be able to stick to something regularly. And for me, basketball has been that thing where it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. How about resources? I mean, are you a fan of? I mean, you mentioned earlier that you tried to dive into some design book, but do you read books often? Do you listen to podcasts? Like, what are your favorite things to soak up?
In the startup community, like Y Combinator videos and like blog posts are a huge, huge thing. So I follow all of those and try and listen to all of them as they come out. But besides that, and like I also really enjoy like commencement speeches and like interviews with people, like watching and listening to interviews specifically.
Yeah,
That's like the equivalent of podcasts. Like Reid Hoffman has a really solid podcast that I follow, Masters of Scale.
yeah. Wait, you met Reed? Didn't you run into him?
Oh yeah. I did. Like I was at TechCrunch Disrupts, which sounds very stereotypical, but I was like, I gotta go. What it's like. And I was coming out of like one of the conference rooms and he was doing an interview in like a super random corner. And so it was just like him with the spotlight on and like me and one other person watching the whole interview.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, shout out random corners. That's amazing. I
Yeah.
remember seeing that on your Instagram. Like, holy cow.
Yeah. I wasn't going to ask for a picture, but when the only other person did and he was like totally accepting, I was like, all right, let's do this.
Yeah, that's too good to pass up. He's an absolute legend as well.
Yeah.
And it's so cool how much like LinkedIn is totally evolving as well. Like it's not just like from a connection standpoint or like a resume standpoint. Like it's
Yeah,
just
they do a lot.
so many people, like so many of the top social media influencers are like hottest on LinkedIn right now. It's crazy.
Yeah.
You mentioned commencement speeches. Do you have any favorites? Like what comes to mind?
Yeah. I mean, I watch like all of them. I think the like,
All of them, every single one.
well, I try and watch, sorry. Okay. I watch a lot of them. I think the ones that are entertaining are the ones by some of the comedians, like Ellen DeGeneres had a really funny one.
Yeah.
But then there are like a lot of the ones that happen at like Harvard, Stanford are super inspirational. And you have like Zuck and like these tech enthusiasts that are interesting to listen to, Sheryl Sandberg, yada, yada.
Yada yada yada.
I think they're all interesting, right? It's just like cool to see what people, you're kind of in a position where you're trying to teach people to be a little more fearless than they'd otherwise be. So it's like interesting to hear what people say in those situations. But I also like the funny ones are good too.
Yeah, totally. And I think subconsciously you get a little confidence boost because it's like you're graduating every time you watch them. So
Right. That might be it.
yeah, that might be it. So congrats on your infinite number of degrees. Let's get to a fan favorite segment here called the Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
The Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, it's top of the line. It's like a commencement speech. But wild business shout out of the week. This is where we talk about a recent ad or campaign that caught our attention and chat about it for a little bit.
Okay.
So earlier when we were chatting, you mentioned something about Groupon. You want to talk about that for a little?
Yeah. So, I mean, the recent marketing that comes to my mind is actually like Tiffany Haddish, who's pretty funny. She's I don't know if she's up and coming or actually like, peaking at this point comedian, because she's in like 4 movies a year and kind of partnered up with Hart. So anyway, but what happened was she was actually doing this talk on the Ellen DeGeneres show about hanging out with Will and Jada Pinkett Smith. And she was talking about how she took them on a Groupon. I forget where they went. It was like the Everglades or something. And she was talking about how she got this great deal and they were shocked that she got a Groupon. It basically had like 10 million plus views or something like that. And as a result, Groupon reached out to her to do a Super Bowl commercial. And I thought both like the actual first interview that everybody looked at and the Super Bowl commercial were really great for Groupon, because it's a company that, I mean, they're probably still growing at a decent clip, but they definitely had their heyday, and they're kind of like, they've moved a little out of the spotlight at this point, I feel, relative to like, a few years ago when everybody was buying them.
Yeah, I agree. And they got some big names, which was smart. And of course, you got to go all out for the Super Bowl. So
yeah,
it's always
fair.
a big undertaking as well. But they stuck out to you.
Yeah.
You mentioned that in addition to the actual commercial, there was like the additional part that stood out to you. Did you find that on your own? Like, or did you look up more about the commercial and see, or like, how were you exposed to the whole?
So I saw them both separately, but I only realized that she became an endorser because of that first video. I forget. I think I saw an article on it. Like Groupon makes great move by, working with Tiffany to create this ad. But I thought what was interesting about it is just like, you want these sort of like super users of your product, and like she makes perfect sense for marketing. So that's why I thought it was genius, is because like you're taking a very natural interview in which you had like no relationship and you're just taking that a step further, which I think is like the best way to do it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Whenever there's a fit like that, it's the best way to do it. Whenever it has the natural feel like that.
Yeah.
It can really resonate. So that's a great example. So thank you for shouting it out for your wild business shout out of the week. There's no harmonica closing here, so don't worry. But Stephanie, we only have a little bit of time left here. I'd love to wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. Are you ready for it?
Yep, for sure.
All right. So you mentioned road trips. What is your number one absolute favorite place to road trip to?
I just went to Santa Barbara and that was awesome. So I thought that was super cool. I would recommend. You hit a lot of like great places along the way from Santa Barbara to SF. I think Yosemite is also a great road trip.
Yeah. Shout out Yosemite Sam. Do you have any weird talents, like anything that you're really good at, but it kind of doesn't have too much of a purpose? Like, for example, like I can touch my forearm with my thumb, but like,
yeah,
what am I going to do?
Yeah, I think like a weird one is like maybe like, I don't know, like throwing like popcorn up in the air and catching it. I don't know, like weird stuff I feel is fun though.
That's a great one. Do you mean like, are you talking like high distances here? I mean, high altitudes here? Like, what's your skill level?
Like, just like, the hand-eye coordination, probably basketball.
Yeah, that's true. What is your favorite basketball memory from your playing days?
So what's interesting about that is I was on this team called this travel basketball team in sort of middle high school called the Lady Bearcats, and we would travel on the weekends around Florida. And one of my friends from that team actually was like, "Hey, Steph, I'm moving to San Francisco. Do you know anyone I can live with?" And I just happened to be moving at the time, so I was like, "Yeah, me." And we hadn't seen each other in like 10 years since we left this basketball team, just because like she actually moved to Columbia, all this stuff happened in between, right? And now we're living together. So I think one of my best basketball memories is, sort of like middle high school when there's a lot less pressure and you're just playing basketball. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it truly, that's incredible. I definitely did not expect a roommate would be an answer for that.
Yeah.
How about the days at IU? What's your favorite IU memory?
That's challenging. I think my favorite IU memory is kind of just typical college experience of just that feeling that everybody is your own age on campus. And basically, I think it's just like, in summary, driving around with friends, kind of blasting music and just, heading to class, things like that. Like that sort of like free-spirited feeling that you get just driving and being at IU.
Yeah, shout out.
What about you?
Go Big Red, go Hoosiers. Well, there's a lot. I mean, for like it will be tough to change this, but of course the Watford shot versus Kentucky comes up as one of the biggest ones.
Of course.
The game winner, just being an IU basketball nerd and being there, because I had never been anywhere where we stormed the court before.
Yeah.
So that we were in like row 26, so we watched it all go down, but we were too far away to storm at the start, and then we were like, okay, we're storming. So then we ran down and did it. Totally. But yeah, that was amazing. And then just in terms of like a more nerdy school answer, I just like was consistently blown away by like the quality of the professors and the students at Kelly. I was just blown away by like how nice and helpful everyone was.
Right.
But just like the subjects you cover and the stuff that you do in class, like I mentioned, took entrepreneurship classes and like had an entrepreneurship major, and some of the stuff that we were doing is like the stuff that you're talking about and doing in real world, where you're actually going out in the streets and asking people for feedback and forming prototypes. And I think that stuff is just so cool. As we start to mature out of our college days, that stuff is really, really cool to look back on, because they do such a good job of training you for the real world, whether it be in a corporate world or complete opposite. So that's my nerdy answer, but Watch Shot will always live.
Number one.
Historic. Yeah. But if you're on a flight around the world and there's only one TV show you could pick from to binge watch the entire time, what show would that be?
Okay, that's easy. So Law and Order, probably SVU or but I like crime shows generally because they're just captivating.
Yeah, they are. Oh, classic. I have the Law and Order intro song going in my head. That music tone, but
somehow there's still like 15 to 20 seasons in going, and like people are still like super anxious for new ones to come out. I'm pretty sure I've seen most of them.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Stephanie. This has been incredible catching up. And so thank you so much for sharing your story about Map2Next and more. It's been really fun connecting and reliving those BGC years. So thanks for coming on. And where's the best place for people to connect with you personally and to try out Map2Next?
Yeah, for sure. So Map2Next is available for download in the App Store, and you can check it out. And then my email is stephanie@map2next.com, and it's spelled map, the number 2 next. And then I mean, also my LinkedIn or, whatever social means, feel free to connect.
Perfect. And in your Instagram, it's xsteph0, right? Like what's the underscore?
Just pick something kind of random, but yeah.
Yeah, I think, there's some underscores in that. We'll link out to your name, but cool. And now the stage is yours. Any final thoughts or a quote? Anything you want to end with, up to you. Go for it.
Sure. I mean, I'll just end by saying thanks, Max. It's been great catching up. Also, I mean, one other challenge that came to mind just for people thinking about entrepreneurship is just your work and life are blended. So there isn't really work and life. There's just one thing happening. So I think what I mean by that is, one of the other challenges besides having to ask people or think about things, approaching people with, and also receiving some negative feedback sometimes, all these new things that happen. One of the other things is just friends getting involved. So it's very natural that some friends will get involved and some will let you down along the way. And I think it's just super important you have to kind of have a personal mission for why you're doing all this in the first place to come back to, right? Because things, they're going to be it's very easy to say that entrepreneurship is hard. That's kind of commonplace, right? But you don't know it until you've been through it. And so I think the reality of things is it's probably even harder than you can suspect some of the days, right? Some of the days.
Right.
In some ways it's maybe arguably easier / more flexible because you can pick your own schedule sometimes. And you're the one organizing meetings versus other people telling you when to show up to them. So, but anyway, I think my final thoughts would just be you got to stay focused on just personal improvement and why you started these things in the first place,
Damn. All right. Started in a blender. Now we're here. Thank you, Stephanie Goldman, Map2Next. Shout out, Blenders. Thank you, Stephanie, for coming on the podcast and sharing your incredible story. And as always, thank you, wild listeners, for tuning in to another episode. Here's your Map2Next steps. See what I did there? Make sure to try out Stephanie's app in the App Store by searching Map2Next and leave a review with your thoughts if you get the chance. You can also do the same with this podcast on Apple Podcasts and your other favorite podcast listening platforms. In addition, you can also explore the business growth and marketing tips and articles at hippodirect.com/blog and hippodirect.com/newsletter. That newsletter is the Hippo Digest, and it's your weekly recap of creative marketing. Plus, you can connect with us on social at Hippo Direct and Max Brandstetter for hippo fun, puns, dry humor, and more. That's all for this episode. Until next time, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!